Sounds good. Thank you. Yeah, I'll probably leave more than a few minutes for questions because I do want to talk about what all of you want to talk about. So I'll be fairly brief with my presentation piece and then just kind of turn it into a conversation. I think that tends to work out a little bit better. But again, appreciate everyone being here and appreciate you guys having us. Always looking to add new schools to the mix, and our connection with Utah State has gone from we didn't have one to we had an intern to here we are, all within probably 6 months of each other. So for those of you that don't know about Manning & Napier, we're an investment management firm located in Rochester, New York. So we're upstate Western New York by Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, about 5.5 hours from the city. We have about 20 billion assets under management at this time. At our last earnings release, that was roughly the amount. And we've been around since 1970. So 50-year anniversary was in April this year. Didn't get to do anything, celebratory with our clients because we couldn't see them, but we're trying to celebrate the year anyways, as it's a big milestone. Not a lot of financial service companies of our size, last that long and are this successful. The firm is an active manager. So the market cycle right now is actually really good for us. We tend to manage risk pretty well. And when the markets are volatile, we do well. So that's kind of the firm is in general. And every summer we have, on top of what the actual business does, we have 6 equity research interns, a couple interns in operations, and then some interns in information technology as well. So a few different opportunities. Equity research is our most applied for and our one that has the largest national reach. We'll get students that apply from, Utah State, and then, UCLA from the West Coast all the way to, University of Rochester, which is 10 minutes away from the firm. So the reach kind of spans all over the place. And a lot of times it's through these types of connections that we have with schools that we get students to apply. So that is kind of very high level about the firm, and I'm happy to answer any specific questions about that. But before I go into my actual presentation, I'll introduce myself. I am a talent acquisition specialist at Manning & Napier. So I am the only, to simplify my title, I'm the only recruiter at the firm. So I do everything from managing our college internship program to hiring I hired our current CTO. So I've done everything across the board from the very, very entry internship level all the way to the C-suite and in between. So everybody that applies, I read your resume. We don't have there's no automated system that cycles things out. So I read every resume that hits our applicant tracking system. Which is a really kind of unique perspective I get to have because there's not job requisitions, there's not candidates apply that I don't see. So that I'm a good person to ask any application type of questions to now that you have me here, because I'll be the one that reads it if you do end up applying. As far as my path, I grew up in Rochester, so I've been here for my whole life. And I went to Keuka College, which is a really, really small liberal arts school in the Finger Lakes region of New York. We have about 1,000 undergraduate students, so we could probably all fit in one building at your school. I majored in business management and played soccer. Soccer was kind of the reason why I went there. And when I graduated, I started working at Manning pretty much right away in January of 2017. And I've been in my talent acquisition recruiting role since August of 2017. And that's a little bit about me. I guess fun fact, I'm married and have 2 dogs, if you guys care about that. But I'll dive into the presentation. So I'm going to pull it up first and then I'll share my screen with you guys. It says I can't share my screen. I don't know. There we go. I got it now. All right. You guys give it a thumbs up if you can see this before I start talking. Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to cover a couple topics. Obviously, my forte is the application interview process and how to be successful with it. I do know a fair amount about the investment industry just from what I've learned. So if you have investment specific questions, I can probably answer them. But I'll kind of target this as my actual presentation, and then questions can be about anything. So I'll leave the door open on that. The application process. So this will vary wherever you're looking at. So I can speak to our application process only, and I can give you some general tips too, but we have a rolling application. So as soon as it opens, which is usually the first week of September, you can apply until it closes. And my recommendation is you apply sooner rather than later, just so you get seen before we get hit with hundreds of resumes. which is the exact tip that I give here in my presentation. So just apply early. If you have questions, reach out to me. Happy to answer them. The application process for us is pretty easy. You can go through Handshake, you can go through our website, and the application will take you maybe 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes. We don't ask you to give us your resume and also fill out all your work history. Just one or the other is good. So we don't do any of that. That is one of my least favorite things as a candidate myself, is having to do that. So if I see that in an application, I click off the page. So we don't do that. That being said, fill out the application fully. So we do ask for like the name of the place you worked. That's it. We don't have to fill out like anything else. So just give us names of places you worked. There's a few checkbox questions, and then that's it. Fill out your name and all that stuff. And my biggest pet peeve is the grammar piece of it. So capitalize your name, capitalize your street names, do all the basic stuff. It just shows an attention to detail. And so I think it's important to lead off that way. So that's my plug for something that I'm not a huge fan of as a recruiter. Does it knock you out of the process? No, but is it a nice thing to do? Absolutely. So just keep that in mind as you're applying. I think I can speak for a lot of different recruiters when I say that the easier things are to read and the cleaner they look, the better it is for us. Talking about resumes, resumes tend to be kind of varying across the board depending on where you go to school and what you major in and what class you've taken. Some schools and universities have classes on this, like building a resume, some like experiential learning type of classes, and some don't. And some students are very organized and build a nice resume themselves, and some don't. So the first thing that I look for as a recruiter is just the formatting. Does your resume look organized? Is it clean? Is it easy to read? If you have one title bolded, do you have all your titles bolded? All that stuff. So formatting is huge for me. I'm kind of a neat freak on the resume front. So just the neater it looks, the better it will be. And then as a college student, I think, from internship to like 5 years out of school, like I still have my GPA in my resume and I graduated in 2016. So I think, in a couple of years, I'll probably remove it and make my school piece a little bit shorter so I can fit more on there. But have your year, have your major, have your GPA. And I always get the question of, is there like a cutoff where I shouldn't put my GPA on there? I typically say no, but if you have above a 3.0, it's probably good to put it on there. That's pretty solid. Leadership and club activities, huge. Put them on there. Describe them as much as you can. Internships, again, huge. Put them on there. Describe them as much as you can. And then this is not something that I knew when I was coming through college, but skills and interests are actually kind of popular on resumes now. So if you speak a different language, or if you play a sport, or whatever it is, other skills you have, if you play chess, things like that, they're typically at the bottom, but it's nice to have kind of a section that can give recruiters something to talk about with you at the start of an interview that doesn't just go from like, hello, how are you? And now what'd you do at this job? You can kind of ease in the conversation a little bit. So having some skills and interest on there is a nice thing to do if you have room for it and feel like you want to. Again, not a requirement by any means. Interview processes can be tricky to put all in one basket, because if you look at the investment banks of the world, like Goldman Sachs and Credit Suisse and Deutsche Bank, they do the big super days. There's a ton of interviews. You fly out there, you meet like 10, 15, 20 people, and they're really extensive. I will speak for our process and say that it is extremely short. We'll have a phone interview with me after you apply. So you talk to me first, then you do a pre-hire assessment we have everyone do. It takes you about 30 minutes. I send your resume up to the hiring manager, whoever that may be. So for research, there's a hiring, group that I work with. For other departments, it's typically just the manager of the role. They review your resume, and then they decide if they want to interview you. For the research internship and all of our internships specifically, if you get an interview, it'll be one round. You'll interview with 3 or 4 people, and we'll make a hiring decision, and we'll let you know within a week. So it's not going to be a drawn out process where you have to meet with 100 different people. We'll take, hour and a half, 2 hours of your time, and that'll be that. We try to be as concise as we can with it, just because we understand that students are really busy. You're applying for more than just our internship, and we understand that. So the quicker we can kind of move you through the process while still being able to vet out, your candidacy, that's what we do. A couple things I think that I would recommend as part of the interview process, what I've heard from our interviewers are things that they really like to see are, if you follow up, if you ask them for their email addresses, or if you follow up with me to get their email addresses and send them a thank you note, I think that's just good practice always. So if you're interviewing for an internship for us or elsewhere, I think it's good practice. As far as questions and asking questions, I think you should come prepared with a couple questions for each interviewer. And I'll highlight a little bit later in the presentation how to kind of set yourself up for success with the questions. Because I think that there are, while in life there are no stupid questions, there are questions to ask interviewers that are really good questions that they'll remember. And there are questions that everybody asks them that they'll forget that you asked because they've heard the same question 60 times. So I'll touch on that a little bit later. When you get the interview, this could work for a phone interview when it's a first round. This could work for a final round interview. The more of a conversation you can make it, the better your prospects are of connecting with the interviewer. If they have to ask you a question and try to pull information and pull answers out of you, it becomes a little bit of a painful process. So just try to make it a conversation, talk to them. If you have a question, kind of the general flow of the conversation, you don't have to save all your questions till the end. You can ask them during the interview. I think that's, so if you're talking about the company culture, for example, if they're talking about it and you have a question about it, when they pause, feel free to ask them the question right there. It kind of flows in the conversation pretty well and can work in your advantage just to keep it conversational. The other thing that I think is really, really important is you can have an exceptional resume. And if you can't speak about the things on there, you have 6 bullet points for one thing, but you can't kind of cut it down a little bit and just give a couple sentences of what it was and what you did, then you're not really kind of helping your cause. Your resume can look great, but you have to be able to kind of break down that information a little bit and tell it to whoever you're talking to in a shortened version, and make sure you hit the highlights of it. So I think that's important to note is, a strong resume is great. Being able to explain your strong resume is exceptional and something that will be, noticed and remembered by people that interview you. So this is exactly what I just said. The first bullet here is just making sure that you can talk about, how well you can explain it is important. Second bullet is what I was alluding to earlier. So asking the right questions at the right time. So if you have me on the phone, for example, I'm in talent acquisition. So I am in HR and I know general company information is good types of questions to ask me. Process, how the process works, what to expect are good questions to ask me. If you're interviewing for a research role, the second interview you're going to have is going to be with the research team, because I'll tell you that when you ask me about the process. So if you have like investment related questions, try to save those for them, because they're better served to answer them than I would be. And same for any position you're interviewing for, the actual hiring manager and the team that you're going to be on are the people to ask your job specific questions to. So I think that if you can kind of make 2 lists of questions, one that are general and one that are job specific, it'll be a lot easier to figure out what you want to ask and how to prepare. And so I think that that's really important, which is a good segue into my last point here is prepare for an interview like you would prepare for an exam, or you'd prepare for a big sports game or an important performance. It's the same type of deal. Do you have to put in as much time as you might put in for like a final exam? Absolutely not. But put yourself in front of a mirror and talk out your answers to common questions you may get, and say them out loud so you hear yourself say them. It's more helpful than you think it would be. I think you myself included, tend to think I'm a pretty good interviewer because I interview people all the time. And I still, if I had an interview, would sit down and prepare for it just to make sure that I have covered all my bases and know what I'm going to say. So I think that it's hugely important to prepare, and the level of preparation will depend on how confident you are as an interviewer. As you do more interviews, and I'm sure that all of you are kind of going through that process now, you become more comfortable and will probably need to prepare a little bit less, but just kind of play it by your own comfort level, and you'll do a good job, I'm sure. So as far as my sort of presentation goes, that is kind of all the talking points that I had. I'm happy to expand on any of them. I'm happy to answer questions. Whatever you guys want to talk about, anything is on the table. If you have questions about the firm or the investment philosophies, things like that, I'm also happy to answer those. But I will open the floor to however you think is best for questions, whether it's in chat or whether people unmute, whatever is fine with me. We've done it both ways. So that is it for presentation for me.
Just to get one started, Ben, one thing I'm curious about is with Samuel Berry. He was kind of one of your interns last summer. Sounds like you really liked him. What was it about Sam that really stood out to you, and how can maybe we replicate the magic that we found with Utah State students?
Yeah, I feel like John and I have had this conversation a couple of times about Sam. I think the first time I talked to John, we talked about Sam for like 5 minutes. Sam had a couple things that he brought to the table that set him apart. So without telling you guys a ton of information about his exact process. We have a score sheet we use for interviews. So you meet with 3 interviewers, they all give you a score based on all the questions they ask you. Sam was the highest score we've ever had. So I interviewed very well. And I think probably a good portion of that, because I got to know Sam pretty well through the process, and he's not necessarily the most talkative person in the world, but he's very intelligent. I think he was very prepared for the interview, and he did well. I think the other thing that worked in his favor is that he truly is passionate about research and investment research. And so when you love to do something, it comes a lot easier to have a conversation about an interview for it. So I think that was another massive advantage for him. The one thing I'll say that caught my eye about Sam right away is, and this is just from his resume review, is he had a really strong GPA and a lot of extracurricular things going on, which is awesome to see. But if you guys know Sam and you want to know what a good resume looks like, ask him. He has an extremely strong and well-formatted resume that would have caught my eye no matter what the rest of the stuff on it was, just on formatting alone. So if you want to know if your resume looks like that, you have a strong resume. And so those combination of factors kind of led to Sam getting an offer. And then, the best part about it was interviewed well, strong resume. Doesn't always equal success as an intern, but Sam did a really good job. I mean, he worked really hard, and we appreciated having him. So it is a easy kind of, for me to talk about how good he was, because it's just, everything he did well. There's not one thing in his process that I can find as a flaw, other than maybe when he was here being more talkative and asking more questions, but that was about it.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben.
Hey, yeah, I've got a question. Sorry, I just made sure I was turning on my camera there. You talked a bit about like the type of questions that sometimes you hear 600 times and they just blend together, and then there's unique ones. Obviously not to take away like the uniqueness of the good questions, but could you just like share examples of like kind of the rote questions that all just blend together, and then maybe one example of a very good question that you've been asked before?
Yeah. So I guess the questions you hear a lot. So questions like this, where somebody will ask you, what types of qualities do you look for in an intern or in an employee, right? Not a bad question, but one that I hear a lot. I think there's a way to ask that question where it's more memorable. So you say, what qualities has a past intern had that have made them stand out, from the rest of the group, or something like that. So you can ask that question a couple ways, and it's just more about kind of phrasing and the wording that you use. Because the more specifically targeted your questions are, the better they are. The kind of like general low-hanging fruit questions, fine to ask, but like I'm not going to tell you not to ask those questions if you want to know the answer to them. But I think there's a way to frame them where it makes us really think about the answer. Whereas like if somebody asked me what our company culture is, I get that that's an important question, but in full transparency, I have a pretty canned answer for it. I'll tell everybody the same thing. If somebody asked me what my favorite part about the company culture is and why I stay at the firm, it's a little bit more personal. So I can answer the question more from my own answer versus just some kind of canned answer that I have set up. So the more you can challenge the interviewer to think about the answer to the question, the better the question is.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
So I had a question about the research role that I think you mentioned was kind of the most common. And I was curious, what does that position kind of look like for an intern coming in?
Yeah. So all of the research interns, when they're hired, are separated into one of our investment sector teams. So we have 4 bottom-up fundamental sector teams, and then we have 2 top-down macro-focused sector teams. So just for the sake of an example that connects with you guys, Sam was part of our technology sector team, and then he spent time in life sciences. So I think the way the interns are selected into those groups is a little not random, but it's based on who you interview with, because you interview with managing directors for each of the groups, and if one of them has a particular liking to you, that's probably where you'll start, because they'll tend to think you'll fit in well with their group, so we try to give somebody a good match for them when they get started. And our interns switch sector teams midway through the summer, so they can be evaluated by more people than just one, because it helps us make a hiring decision. If 5 people say you're great, or if one person says you're great, it's better if we have 5 people saying it because it gives us a little bit more flexibility with kind of where we place you when you're hired full time. As far as like what the internship looks like for our research interns, they'll work on anywhere from like 1 to 3 specific stock write-ups over the course of the summer. So you'll work directly with a senior analyst or managing director who will give you, say, hey, we want to look at this company. Can you kind of start the fundamental research? Can you build me a research report? And then if the research report goes well and it matches up as like a strategy fit, can you then create a valuation for it? And so that's kind of a general gist of what the projects look like. Some will be different. You won't always find a perfect fit. So sometimes you'll go back to the drawing board. Sometimes a research analyst will ask you if you have a company that you would suggest. So you can do a little bit of research into the entire universe of companies covered by that analyst and figure out if you have a suggestion. So it just depends a little bit, but we try to get our interns, we have our interns work on companies that we are actually considering adding to our portfolio. So none of the work you're doing is theoretical. It's all applicable work. We don't just have you do work to see if you can do it. We have you do work on companies that we want to look at. And then if you can kind of produce, good quality work and it makes sense, a handful of our interns have been part of buy recommendations of companies in the portfolio. So that's not something every intern gets to be a part of because it's a little bit more dependent upon the research, but we've had that happen too. So there's a little bit of variance, but generally speaking, that's kind of what the internship looks like.
Thank you. And then are those internships, are they just for like juniors and sophomores, or like what about for someone who's graduating? Like would they do an internship or their full-time positions? Because that's where I'm graduating in May of next year. So I'm kind of curious what there is for like people who are graduating.
So we target rising seniors for internships. So the summer between your junior and senior year. Doesn't mean that if you're outside of that realm, you shouldn't apply. But I will say that there's a very heavy lean toward that class year for the sole purpose of they can intern, go back to school, and if we make them a return offer, they can come back after. We do occasionally hire full-time out of our full-time research associates out of, that are graduates. We don't always have a posting live, but we have a general application on our website. So if you fall in kind of that category, it would be worth, submitting that so we can at least kind of get the network started and get the conversation started because we don't have a ton of active openings in research that are full-time.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
In that same vein, Ben, would you mind expounding on the mentorship or any sort of training that interns receive during the program?
Yeah, so there's a few things. As far as mentorship goes, you'll work every single day with a senior analyst or managing director, and it's more than just they give you a project and you go do it and that's that. You'll talk to them about various things, project related, life related, ask them about their path. So it's kind of an informal mentorship, but it typically evolves organically for most, if not all of our interns. As far as training and other things that are unique about our internship, I think there's a couple things. So the first is we have what's called Manning and Napier University for all of our research interns, which is a sort of classroom-like setting training for all of them where different senior level analysts and MDs will come in and talk about a specific investment strategy that we use or talk more about their path to where they are. And it takes place over the first handful of weeks of the internship, and you go like 2 days a week from 5 to 6 p.m. and do these like 1-hour sessions. The culmination of M&U is, I think it's just that you have a better understanding of the firm as a whole and the research strategies as a whole. So it's really useful as you kind of dive deeper into the projects that you're working on. The other thing that was really cool this summer that we will continue to do is all of our interns had a series of 3 meetings with our CEO. So it was our CEO and just the interns, and that was it. And our CEO, Mark Mayer, who started in 2019, wanted to do that because he was interested in learning more about the interns to get to know them, because the fact of the matter is we're probably going to make full-time offers to some of the students. And so he wants to know who they are. And so a lot of that conversation was less formal about the internship and just more like, hey, who are you? Where do you go to school? What are you majoring in? Talking about just kind of some general stuff. And he told them about his kind of path too. But another form of mentorship that can start. So like the interns that got return offers for us that are going to come back, they know the CEO already, which is, probably more personally than I do, which is a pretty cool kind of, thing to have as you started a company. I don't think a lot of new graduates have that kind of connection with somebody who's at such a high level of the firm. So that was new this year, but something that we'll definitely plan on continuing because it was very well received.
Great, thank you.
Ben, I've got one. Could you
Sure.
talk a little bit about what it looks like? Let's say you do the internship. Let's say you're like Sam and you do well and you come on full time. What's the trajectory look like? What is someone doing after a couple of years at the firm?
Yeah, so there's a good bit of variance to that, but I'll give you kind of this how I would envision a perfect world happening. You'll get an offer to come back as a research associate, which is our most junior level full-time position. Research associates are pretty much the exact same functionality as you would have as an intern, with a little bit more independence and also a little bit more of an administrative piece. So like taking notes at group meetings and things like that are part of an associate's role. So you come in and do that, and let's say you're doing really, really well. Like you're a top associate and you're tracking well. Within a year, really, it depends a little bit on, it's all performance based. There's no like you have to do this for 2 years to do this. It's you could do well for a year and get promoted to the next level, which is a senior associate, which again, senior associates have a little bit more freedom. And as far as like the research write-ups, they're definitely watched a little less. They're watched, from further away from the analysts. The analysts definitely trust them a bit more to produce quality work, so there'll be less check-ins. And our senior associates also kind of they don't do the administrative part anymore. So they're specifically looking at stock research, and that's kind of what they're tasked with. Senior associate role, when you get there, you're basically being groomed to be an analyst. And so that's kind of the time in your investment research life at Manning when our teams figure out if you have what it takes to be an analyst. So can you actually suggest stocks, or can you just work on ones that are suggested? And there's a significant difference in those two things. And that's kind of when you figure out if you're going to be a long-term person at Manning & Napier or not. If you have the analyst chops and you're ready for it, again, another year or two, you can become an analyst. And the only tricky part about becoming an analyst is there has to be a spot open. So we don't technically like make new positions. We wait till there's a spot open, and then whoever the best associate is will become the next analyst. And the unfortunate circumstances, sometimes that's not in the group that you're currently in. Sometimes you shift groups. So it's not a perfect system, unfortunately, but we really just look for the most talented people, and then we make sure that they become analysts, because analysts are the people that have one of the largest impacts on how the company does. And so that's, it's a really important role, and not something we take lightly. And so we start the seriousness of it at the internship level, and the entire way through, it's the same way. The one thing that I would add to this, and it doesn't necessarily, not part of John's question necessarily, but one really interesting thing about Manning & Napier and our full-time people is the way that our analysts are paid. So investment research, obviously a high-paying position that's pretty well known. Our analyst bonus is strictly based on how well the stocks under their coverage do from an absolute value. So it's not based against the benchmark. If an analyst is the lead on a stock that tanks, they can have money subtracted from their bonus. That's just the way that it works. But if they have 3 stocks that are doing really well, you get paid really well. That's kind of how the numbers relate. And it helps us. It's kind of a check for us to make sure that we're doing what's in our client's best interest. So analysts aren't paid for what they do for the company or for themselves or for any of that. They're paid for what they do for our clients. So the best absolute returns, highest pay. And that's not something that's very common in the industry, but something that's very unique to us. And I think a lot of our analysts like that. I think it makes it more of you get a chance to compete with yourself versus having to be super cutthroat and do better than another analyst. You have to do better than the absolute value of stock. And so that's what kind of makes it unique and interesting.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
In considering the internship program, do you require interns to have some background on the equity market and its functions, or does that matter?
It is strongly preferred, but it's not necessarily a qualification, I would say. So we've had interns so one of our interns that got an offer from last summer had really no equity market experience himself, no internships. He wasn't part of an investment club, didn't have his own portfolio. He was more of a very intelligent economics mind. So he understood the macroeconomy, and a lot of his work had been like an economics research assistant for a professor at school, stuff like that. So he was able to speak about the markets from a much more kind of broad theoretical pathway versus a stock specific. And that works too. So there's qualifications that are must-haves, and then there's those that are bonuses. Investment research and investment background is a bonus, but it's also something that's really important if you have it, and it makes you a great candidate. The must-haves are, you have to be passionate about the market. So you don't have to have worked in them, but you have to want to work in them. You have to love them. You have to be able to communicate, and that is asking questions, that is being able to explain your reasoning on things. And you have to be willing to listen to constructive criticism and then use it. And those are the three things that you are absolute intangibles, have to have them, or it typically doesn't work out. It doesn't mean you won't get hired, but our best interns have those qualities. I would say that probably 80% of our interns have an investment background though. So not to, mislead you, but it definitely is common. And I think, it's, you could talk about what comes first, the chicken or the egg. Do you have investment experience first before you do an internship, or is the internship the start of your investment experience? It can work both ways. It depends on a lot more factors than just that.
Thanks.
Yep. What else? We could talk about anything. We can talk about the firm, our process. We can talk about what you guys, it doesn't really matter.
Hey, Ben.
Hey.
Yeah, I think it might be useful for the students to know, like, to the degree you can talk about this, like what technical questions, like if their resume lends itself to that, what kind of technical questions they might get, what they should probably try to prepare for in an interview.
Yeah. So our interview process starting last year was completely revamped. So our research interview process is almost 100% focused on behavioral interview questions. So it's not necessarily technical skills, but they're much more of a soft skill behavioral focus to them. You will get technical questions as follow-ups, but that's not where it starts. I will, at the risk of one of you or multiple of you, applying and receiving research interviews, I will read you a couple of the questions these will definitely be asked 100%. So give you a little bit of an advantage, I guess. So one of the questions that you'll get asked by one of the interviewers is, can you describe a time you received constructive criticism about your work or yourself? What was it? And then do you agree with it? So that gives you an indication of the type of questions we're asking. We're not asking you to tell us what stock do you like. We're asking us you to dig a little deeper into your soft skills and figure out who are you and how do you operate. We can teach you the stock and technical stuff and the finance stuff and how to build a model. We can't teach you to respond to constructive criticism better. We can't teach you to love the industry. So those are the things that we ask you about. So one other question, I guess maybe a little bit less. This is maybe a little bit more technical, but maybe less so. Tell me about a book or article you've read recently. We like our interns to be following the markets and following the news. So tell us about something that you read in the news or a book you read recently. And the, follow-ups to that could range from, did you like it? What did you like about it? What about it do you want to investigate more? These are not, so I helped create these questions. I understand they're not typical and they're not easy to answer, but that's why we do them, because the people that do really well, it's pretty indicative of how well you'll do as an intern. So we specifically wrote our questions to be tricky. The single most important question that you will get in an interview with us, and this is worth noting because it probably is the same across the board. When an interviewer asks you what questions you have for them, make sure you have them. Don't not have any questions. That's one of the biggest things that I get in feedback loops of concerns about somebody who interviewed is that they didn't have any questions. Especially our research interviewers, because it's a role that requires you to be curious. If you don't have questions, those two things do not go well together. So make sure you have questions and that you can pre-prepare them. You don't have to kind of think of them off the cuff, but just make sure you ask questions. That's huge. So a little bit of an advantage if any of you interview. Now you know 2 of our questions. So.
Hey, Ben.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what are some common questions that people ask after the interview that maybe are repetitive or that you get, frequently?
Yeah. Company culture is a repetitive question, but a good one. So I don't mean to give that a negative connotation, because I don't think repetitive means bad, but our company culture is a common question. I think especially younger generations care a lot more about company culture than some of the more senior people that we hire. But that's a big one. I get questions that range. I mean, a lot of like general questions for me, because that's more of what my role is. I think a lot of interns will have questions about strategies that we employ in investments and how do our strategies work. What does our typical client look like? We're a publicly traded company, so you can look up our ticker and find out a lot of information about current performance. So we get a lot of performance questions. Those are the questions that I can't answer, and I just have to defer to somebody else because I don't know. But people ask, like, you saw your stock price dip over the past 6 months, what led to that, and what is the company doing to kind of pull that back up or sort that out? And those are the questions that I love, because that show that somebody did their homework on us and looked into it. You can find all of our products on our website, so you can see like what our mutual funds are. People ask questions about that. It's a wide range, but the most common are, what do you look for in an intern? What does your company culture look like? What does the rest of the process look like? What does a day in the life of an intern look like? And most of those questions are the questions, not that I would say you stay away from, but I would try to ask some of the more research, like look at our website and try to ask questions based off things you can't find on there versus some of the more standard things. I think it just makes the interview stand out more. Like I said, you're more memorable. We had, so to explain why that's important, at the risk of sounding, maybe a little bit braggadocious, we have 6 intern spots and we had 750 applicants last year. So such a small percentage of people are getting offers and getting spots. The more memorable you make your interview, the more likely you are to kind of fall in that camp.
Hey, Ben. You kind of hit on this earlier, but I'd love to hear, especially your perspective as a recruiter, with regards to, I guess we've been talking a lot about, networking, how to, do it, how to make it seem natural, how to, it helping in the process, particularly, networking with recruiters. Could you share maybe a couple examples of, things that people have done both with you and other people at the firm to, that was an effective networking, interaction, and maybe some, advice or pitfalls or really bad networking experiences that you've had to try and avoid?
Yeah, that's a great question. The good things to do in networking, or ways to make your network work better, is alumni networks are so underrated. I guarantee that a school that's your size, there are alumni working in a field that you want to work in. So use that as much as you can. You could search, probably just search your school on LinkedIn and type in like Utah State and then type in investment banking, and you'll find people, for example, and utilize that. So I was just thinking specifically for us, most of you or some of you or probably know who Sam is at least. So that's a good kind of entryway into Manning Napier. Hey, I go to Utah State. We had Sam Berry intern with you in the summer of 2020, was interested in learning more. Easy, done, you're in. The other thing too about us specifically is we're a really small firm. So the fact of the matter is, if you introduce yourself in a way that's not like, hey, can you just read my resume? But if you show a genuine interest in what we're doing, whoever you're reaching out to will respond to you. And I think most people will have, especially in research, they're open to talking to anybody about the markets, whoever wants to, because they love it. So if you want to talk about it, they'll talk about it. As far as the easier part of your question to answer is tactics that don't work. And this happens to me all the time. So I'll get random LinkedIn messages from somebody who asked me if I could just look at their resume and see where they fit at the firm. But I have no indication that they actually care about what we do or who we are. It'll be, hey, my name is this. Here's my resume. Can you look and see if there's any spots that would be a fit for me at the firm? I will read the resume. I don't love that tactic. I don't find it to be, I think the one thing you need to do when you're reaching out to network is show an interest in what the person is doing or what the company is doing. And you're much more likely for that networking or that contact to go well. If you're just looking for a job and you just unsolicited kind of like, hey, I'm looking for a full-time position. What do you have? First of all, you can find it on the website. So it's easier to actually find the website than it would be to find me. And second of all, I don't know that you're interested. I don't know what you're looking for. I think that people who just kind of throw resumes at me or just randomly shoot me connection requests that have no message and I have no idea who they are. I'm pretty lenient with who I'll accept and who I'll talk to, which is anybody, but I don't love that tactic. So I think there's, I'll never say no, I guess. And I don't think that many people will, but I think that there's tactics, like I said, using your alumni network and asking, being relatable, that are much better for networking than just kind of randomly shooting out a LinkedIn request to 70 people and seeing what sticks. It's generally just not good practice. Anything else that anybody wants to know or has questions about?
Just maybe one last question if no one has anything else. I'd be curious what sets Manning and Napier apart from other asset managers in the space and how they continue to be maybe the top tier spot going forward.
Yeah, a good question. I think there's a couple of things that I would say that set us apart. A couple of them are things that I have noticed as an employee, and then a couple of them are more historical things. So from a historical perspective, you don't last in the industry for 50 years without being good at what you do, especially in this space. So the longevity of the company, I think, speaks volumes about how strong it is. Assets have flowed and they've been much higher than they are now. They've been much lower than they are now. So that fluctuates a bit and just is kind of a function of the markets in the time, but you don't last in this space unless you're good at it. I think the other thing too, and anybody who's a investment buff or interested in regulatory environment, you can look up the Manning rule. That's probably what we are most known for. One of our founders was very, very involved in the SEC created regulation that investment managers must put the needs of their client before the needs of anyone else. So it's an SEC regulation named after our founder, Bill Manning, called the Manning rule. It's on our website. It's one of the things we highlight. It's also just kind of something to notice. So I would just connect that. Our focus to client is real, and it should be for every investment manager. But for us, it's kind of tried and true, and that's been the case for as long as we've been around. When our new CEO started in 2019, we have an atrium in the company, so he kind of stepped up on the top step of the atrium and gave like an introduction when he was hired and on his first day. And I was like, this probably the second thing he said is he knows about our dedication to clients, so that's important. As far as what sets us apart now and things that I have experienced as an employee, our focus on community. So we have employees that do various things for the community, community service related events and things like that. But as a firm, we give every employee 3 days a year of paid time off to go do community service for organizations that are, that they feel a connection to. So you can say, hey, I'm taking a day off because I'm going to go do this for Habitat for Humanity, and still get paid, go volunteer, give your time to something that means something to you. And so I think that's, just unique and important, and being involved in the community, especially as a small firm, has helped us. I mean, we're in Rochester, people know about Manning and Napier, and that's part of the reason why. The other thing, I guess, and you would probably hear this from every single company that you talk to, because no one's going to tell you that everyone they work with they hate. But I think we have people, our people in general are, first class people, and just kind of second to none, but also really, really, really smart people. I mean, I interact with people across all different disciplines, and I think that all of them are smarter than me. And I've learned something from every interaction that I've had with somebody. And so I think that takeaway is important because especially as somebody who's new in the industry and a new employee, the more that you can learn, the faster you can learn it, the better off you'll be down the line. So, I've been there for 4 years and I'm still learning stuff day in and day out. And so I think that that's important. So that whole kind of combination of all those factors, puts us in, I appreciate it. You said it puts us in the top tier. I'd hope that we're there too. But I think it's just something that makes the firm, who it is. And I would add that manning and Napier and the environment that we have is certainly not for everybody. If you want to be in a fast-paced environment, but you don't love the huge city, manning and Napier is for you. If you want to be in Manhattan because you think that lifestyle is fun and there's people that do and they love it, manning and Napier is probably not for you. It's definitely different than that, investment lifestyle you get in Chicago and Boston and New York City. And so as you kind of weigh out your options, that's just my plug. We're a smaller city, more suburban in nature. And so I think that if that's something that interests you, it's the right place. I would say that confidently. And if it's not, that's okay too. I don't expect everyone to want to work at Manning and Napier, but that's, in fairness, I like to kind of give both sides versus just telling you guys how great it is. I think there's some good and there's some not bad, but there's some good and there's some things that we just don't offer that other companies do. And location is one of those things. So just kind of keep that in mind. But the industry is great. And if you'd asked me 4 years ago if I'd be working in the investment industry, I'd probably, and especially in HR, I probably would have laughed. It was not something I expected, but it's also now, to me, the investment industry is much closer to me than anything else. I can't really see myself leaving it. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. And a ton of great points that any student interested in applying should kind of keep in their back pocket and go back to. I think we have time for one more question. And so be thinking of that before we go, but also in the chat, John was kind enough to post Ben's email as well as his LinkedIn. And so if you have any additional follow-up questions, I recommend sending him an agenda, sending him some of the questions you'd like to ask, and kind of keeping that connection going. But that said, Ben, do you have one more question in you if students are out there?
Hey, yeah, I've got one more question real quick. You talked about, the path that somebody might take is getting an internship offer and then getting an offer as a junior associate and kind of the progression based off how they're performing. For those that maybe decide that they don't want to go on like the full analyst route, if they've got a return offer and they've spent a couple years at Manning and Napier, or maybe the firm just doesn't think it's a right fit for an analyst offer, where do those people transition to? Do they stay in the investment industry, or do they kind of find their places in other sort of in other businesses?
You probably get a good mixture. I think that most people that get to that senior associate level have figured out that they definitely want to be in the industry, but sometimes it's just the role is not the exact right thing. Not everybody has what it takes to be a stock picker. I certainly do not. You have to be really, really, really confident in yourself to do that job, because a lot is on the line when you're doing it. But a lot of the people who don't necessarily, work out in research for us, I've seen the probably three of the most common things is they'll move to a role within the firm that is like more kind of like portfolio strategies or sales, things like that, where it's much more people facing. Research is a heavy reading, heavy analytical job. They'll move to something that's more client facing, because the thing about it is people that in research know the industry and know everything about it very well, but sometimes it's more of the analytical piece of it that they're just not that's just not their forte. So they'll go do something else at the firm. We encourage people moving across departments. So I would lead with that, is just because you don't make it as an analyst doesn't mean you can't work at Manning Napier. The other thing that we see a lot of people do is they'll get to kind of that senior associate level, and either they have an indication that maybe they're not going to be an analyst, or we just don't have a spot. A lot of people go back to school, do an MBA, stuff like that. And happens not frequently, but But we just had somebody do that exact situation, and we didn't want to lose him, unfortunately, but he went back to school for his MBA. So that happens. And we encourage that. I think furthering education and figuring out what you want to do, just continuing to learn is a good thing. So we're not going to ever tell you that you shouldn't do it. We do sponsor like the CFA. So if you're working toward that sort of designation or any other related designation, you can continue working and we'll sponsor and pay for it and all of that. So, so we do encourage kind of further education. Just a quick kind of off the path of the question. The third thing that I see is people move to Rochester for the summer for a couple of years and realize that they don't like it. The location is probably one of the hardest things to lock in. I think that a lot of people at Napier, especially in senior level roles, have some connection to the area already when they started, which is, 15, 20 years ago for a lot of them. They've been at the firm for a long time. But a lot of people will come to Rochester and realize that it isn't for them. And so that is why we use the internship program, because you get to come and live here for 2 months and figure out if you think you can see yourself being here. And that was the hardest part about our last internship program, is nobody came here because it was remote. So for those return offers, the people that accept them, they have to learn Rochester when they move here full time, which is a little bit more of a difficult situation. So that's the other thing, is people will move away, or if they're not from the area, move home or go to a big city or stuff like that. Usually you see the reverse. Usually people go to New York City first and then come to us. But sometimes they'll come to us, realize they want to be in a big city, and then they'll go to New York. So you see it both ways. But those are the three kind of most common avenues for people that, don't pan out as analysts for us.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
I think with that, we'll call it there. Ben, thank you for your time. We really appreciate it today. And we'll send this recording out to students if you want to just review it, or if you want to pass it along to some of the other students in your cohort. But most importantly, we really appreciate your time, Ben, and we look forward to sending forward some applicants here in the next few weeks.